The stuff of nightmares allegedly hidden behind the doors of this simple Ohio home.
This is pure evil. What we saw down here today is pure evil.
16 children ranging from 18 months to 18 years old were pulled out of what authorities are calling a house of horrors, conditions inside described as deplorable.
Our livestock was kept in better conditions than the children.
4 adults arrested, now charged.
All of those counts are felonies of the second degree.
2 family members, Gary Siders Jr. and Elizabeth Siders, were also indicted on charges of sexual battery and unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. We have been following this case since June 30th, when law enforcement removed those 16 children from that home on Omar Street.
Every single one of us got it wrong. For weeks now, we've been asking the same question about that house in Vinton County. Not what was inside. We know what was inside. 16 children, 1 room, 12 feet by 12 feet, ages 18 months to 18 years.
Just almost beyond comprehension.
16 children ranging from infant to teenager rescued from this small 1-story home in deplorable conditions. County records showing it had just 1 bathroom.
Just where they're covered in bugs and squatting and had that distant look in their eyes. It's terrible.
Investigators standing at a press conference reaching for a word, and the word they landed on was feral.
Most of our livestock was kept in better conditions than the children. It was extremely high presence, I'm sure, of bacterial and human feces. It was just a disgusting scene.
I think if they would have waited another 24 hours, there was a very high probability that we'd be dealing with a death or multiple deaths.
No. The question was simpler than that, and nobody could answer it. Why were police there at all? Because think about it. That house sat on Omar Street for years. Years. Neighbors walked past it. People saw those kids at the store. And then on June 30th, out of nowhere, law enforcement shows up with a search warrant, and everything comes apart. So what changed? What finally made somebody knock? Most of us assumed it was a welfare check, or an anonymous tip, or a neighbor who finally couldn't live with themselves anymore. It was none of that. New court paperwork just landed, and it answers the question. And I need you to understand something before we go any further. The answer is not a relief. It's worse than the theories were. There are new indictments in this case: sexual battery, unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, and 2 names attached to this investigation that most people following this story have never even heard. But the part that will stay with you is this. When those officers walked up to that house on June 30th, they were not looking for children. They didn't know children were there. They came to collect one specific thing from Gary Siders Jr., and what they came to collect tells you exactly what investigators already believed was happening inside that family. Let's get into it.
A horrifying discovery inside a small Ohio home. Officials rescuing 16 children they say were living in deplorable conditions. We do want to warn you, some of these details may be disturbing to hear.
Start with the paperwork, because the paperwork is where this breaks open. Gary Siders Jr. has been indicted on 2 counts of sexual battery and 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. And so has Elizabeth Siders. Read that again. The same charges, both of them. 2 counts of sexual battery and 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor against the mother of those 16 children. That single fact rearranges everything. Because up until now, there's been a version of this story where Elizabeth is something other than a perpetrator. Her attorney has leaned into it. Her mental health has come up in her push for bond.
Yeah, Tommy Stolley is the attorney appointed to Elizabeth Siders. I talked to him after he visited her in jail this afternoon. He said today she shared more information about her children and told him they were all born in hospitals. He says that he takes issue with comments authorities made calling those conditions inside the home pure evil and wanted to dispel some of the rumors. Here's some of our conversation. Is it your understanding that the kids were forced to stay inside?
I don't think we've seen any evidence to prove that. There's been no evidence to suggest that there were any restraints in the home, that that the children were locked or forced to remain in the 12 by 12 room. I think this is one of the things that's been really sensationalized on the internet.
The picture being painted was of a woman who was also trapped in that house. Another person under Gary's control, not a partner in what happened there. That argument just got significantly harder to make. Now, officials have been extremely careful about what they're releasing, and there's one thing they made a point of stating directly. The victims in these sexual abuse cases are not the couple's own children. I want to be precise about that, because there's a lot of speculation circulating, and most of it is wrong. Authorities said these cases involve intrafamily relations. They said the cases do not pose a risk to the general public, and the Attorney General specifically added that this does not involve human trafficking. So no, this is not the sex ring story people were building in the comments. Officials shut that down on camera. But here's where it gets strange, because if the victims aren't the 16 children in that room, then who are they? And how did investigators get from those victims to that house? That's where the two new names come in: Josh Saunders, Brandon Henderson. If those names mean nothing to you, that's the point. They haven't been part of this conversation at all, but they were the beginning of it.
Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson Sr. arraigned Monday, facing a combined 25 charges in a sex abuse investigation that involves 2 children. Now, authorities say that this has a direct connection to the Siders investigation, as those family members await their next court appearance.
Investigators opened an investigation into allegations of child abuse back in December of last year. That investigation produced charges against Saunders and Henderson. And while investigators were working that case, while they were pulling on that thread, they started looking at Gary and Elizabeth Siders. There's one more detail in the records, and it's the kind of detail that raises more questions than it settles. Brandon Henderson is described as part of the larger Siders family. What exactly that means? Nobody will say. The relationship isn't spelled out. Authorities are being tight-lipped in a way that's unusual, even for a case involving minors. But the sequence, the order in which all of this happened, that's the part that reframes this entire case. And you need to hear it in order. Here's the chain. Follow it exactly as it happened. It starts with a phone call, not from a neighbor, not from a family member, from clerks at a Dollar General who noticed something about some children they observed and picked up the phone. That call led to an investigation into child sex abuse. That investigation led to charges against Josh Saunders and Brandon Henderson. Working that case pulled investigators toward Gary Siders Jr., and they wanted something from him specifically, something that isn't optional, something you need a judge to sign off on. They wanted his DNA. Law enforcement sought a search warrant for the DNA of Gary Siders Jr., related to the child sex abuse case. Once he was located, warrants were executed to secure that sample for genetic testing, and it was upon serving that warrant for DNA in a sex abuse case involving victims who were not his children that the existence and the condition of 16 children at the Omar Street house became known. That's it. That's the whole thing. Nobody went there for those kids. Nobody was checking on them. There was no rescue mission. Officers walked up that path to swab a man's cheek in an entirely separate case, and the door opened onto 16 human beings living in conditions that made grown investigators struggle to describe them. They were found by accident. Sit with that for 1 second, because if that DNA warrant is never signed, if a judge says the evidence isn't strong enough, if those clerks at Dollar General decide it's not their business, if that December investigation goes nowhere, then nobody opens that door. And those children are still in that room right now. They were rescued because of a paperwork technicality in somebody else's case. That's not a happy ending. That's a near miss, and it's terrifying. And if this is the kind of reporting you want to keep seeing, the subscribe button costs you nothing. Those clerks made one phone call. All I'm asking for is one click now. There's a question sitting underneath all of this that most people are walking straight past. Why did investigators need his DNA at all? Because DNA warrants are not fishing expeditions. You don't get one because a man seems suspicious. A judge signs that warrant because prosecutors can articulate something specific they expect that sample to do. So what did they expect it to do? I brought in Kim Deonia to help with this because there is genuinely no better person to read these tea leaves. She prosecuted the Turpin case, the original House of Horrors. She's a former sex crimes prosecutor, and she has stood inside a case that looked structurally identical to this one. And I want to be clear about what follows. Everything she offers here is professional interpretation, not a court finding, not an announcement from any prosecutor's office. This is an expert reading the available facts and telling you what they suggest to her. Her reaction to the DNA warrant was immediate, because reporting has connected some of this material back to an investigation from 2022. And in her view, that's exactly what makes the warrant so revealing. You don't chase a DNA sample 4 years later for no reason. If a case is cold, it stays cold. The fact that investigators went and got a judge to sign a warrant in 2026 tells her they expected that sample to match something they already had in hand. In her opinion, there are essentially two ways that happens. The first is that there's biological material, physical evidence recovered from a victim, and they need to determine whether it matches him. The second is harder to hear. A victim may have contracted a sexually transmitted disease. In that scenario, investigators would need to test whether Gary Siders Jr. is positive for that same infection, to establish whether he transmitted it to her. Both are her theories. Neither has been confirmed by anyone. But she's careful to point out that DNA in a sexual assault case is not general-purpose evidence. It's targeted. You're looking for a match against a rape kit. That's what it's for, which means, in her reading, investigators weren't wondering whether Gary Siders Jr. was involved in something. They already believed he was. They were building the proof, and she does not think this is anywhere near over. Her phrase for where we are right now is the tip of the iceberg. She expects more victims. She expects more charges. And she said something that I think a lot of people watching have been afraid to say out loud, that she would not be surprised if, at some point in the future, charges are added involving the Siders' own children. That is her expectation. No prosecutor has announced anything like that. But her reasoning is grounded in experience. In her career, when one count of child predation surfaces, other victims often find the courage to follow. And disclosure of sexual abuse is a process. For some survivors, it takes decades. Which brings us to the cruelest part of this. Because if she's right, if there are more victims inside that house, the people best positioned to say so may be the least able to. Kim explained something to me that I haven't been able to shake since. When she was working the Turpin case, her team consulted experts trying to understand exactly how much damage had been done to those children. Not the visible damage, the developmental damage. And one expert gave her an image. Take a slice of Swiss cheese. Holes all the way through it. Now take cheddar. Solid. A child's brain is supposed to develop like the cheddar. Whole, continuous. But children who don't receive language, socialization, the ordinary interactions that every other child gets by default, they miss developmental markers at the exact ages those markers are supposed to form. That creates holes. And those holes, in most cases, do not fill in later. You can offer therapy. You can offer safety and time and every resource available. Some of it helps. But there's a real chance the damage is permanent. Remember what we've heard about the children in Ohio. Some of them reportedly couldn't speak. Some reportedly couldn't spell their own names. So when people ask whether these kids can help prosecutors, whether they can describe what happened to them, the honest answer is that it will take far longer than anyone wants. In the Turpin case, with the prosecution office meeting those children every single week, deliberately building trust, it took roughly 6 months before one of them felt safe enough to open up. That was Jordan, going to Kim and her investigator. 6 months, with weekly contact, with a team that knew exactly what they were doing. And Kim will tell you plainly, she does not believe the Turpin children ever disclosed everything. Now to the part of this case people argue about most. Is Elizabeth Siders a perpetrator, or is she a victim too? Her defense has been building the second story. Her mental health has been raised. Her attorney has framed her as another person swept up in what Gary created. And Kim, who has no reason to be generous here, says the honest answer is complicated, because on one hand, she's seen it. In her career, she has worked cases where a wife participated directly, where a mother held a child down so the father could commit the assault, where a mother allowed her children to be abused for money or permitted photographs to be taken. She says it is not uncommon, it is horrifying, and it is not uncommon. But then there's the other detail, the one that stopped her. Elizabeth married Gary Jr. when she was 15 years old. He was 18. Kim's reaction to that was immediate because it is the exact fact pattern from the Turpin case. Louise was around 15 when she married David. He was 18. The same ages, the same gap, in two of the most extreme child neglect cases this country has produced, and she makes the point that there's a reason 15-year-olds can't marry freely. A reason the law requires a parent's signature. A 15-year-old is not emotionally developed enough to marry and start bearing children. In California, a 15-year-old having sex with an 18-year-old is statutory rape, a crime, standing entirely on its own. So could that have produced genuine victimization? Could there have been control, psychological, emotional, established when she was still a child, and then compounded year after year until we arrive at where we are now? Kim says absolutely that's possible. But possible isn't the same as a defense that works. Her prediction is that Elizabeth's team will argue she couldn't form the requisite intent, that her mental health made it impossible for her to intend to abuse those children or to intend to endanger them. That's the shape she expects this to take over the next year or two. She also thinks it will fail. Her reasoning is duration. Elizabeth lived in that house, in those conditions, with those children for years, 18 years of it. And Kim's read is that it becomes very hard to convince any jury or any judge or any mental health professional that across 18 years, there was never a single moment where she could have gotten out. At some point, in Kim's view, she stopped being a victim and became a co-conspirator. There's also what's missing. No reported signs of psychosis, no hallucinations, nothing that suggests a mind so compromised that it explains keeping 16 children in a 12-by-12 room for the better part of 2 decades. She points to the Turpins for precedent. Louise raised a mental health diversion defense. It was shut down almost as fast as it was raised. It played no part in sentencing. Where it might matter is later. If Elizabeth is convicted, her victimization starting at 15 could come in as a mitigating circumstance at sentencing, an argument for a determinate term instead of life. That's a very different thing from innocence. I want to close with someone who lived this. Jalissa Turpin was one of the children in that California house. She was 11 when she got out. And she agreed to talk to me because she has a message for the people currently making decisions about the children in Ohio. She told me she didn't know friends were real, not that she didn't have any, that she thought the whole concept was fictional. People talking to their neighbors, kids having friends at school. She assumed that was something that existed in movies, invented, not a thing that happened to actual people. She didn't know school was normal. And when she got out, the phrase that confused her most was, "How are you?" People kept asking it. She couldn't understand why everyone was so concerned about her. It took her a while to realize it's just what people say. Because in that house, she cannot remember a single time an adult asked if she was okay. She described getting out as her first day on Earth, seeing a tree, breathing outside air. She said it felt like heaven. But here's why she really wanted to talk. Because getting out was not the end of it for her. Jalissa and her siblings were placed into the foster care system in California, and they were abused again. Their foster parents, Marcelino and his wife Rosa, were ultimately charged with child abuse. She survived that house. And then the system that was supposed to protect her handed her to someone else who hurt her. That's her entire reason for speaking about Ohio. 16 children are in the system right now, and her message to the people responsible for them is that every single step matters. The homes, the caseworkers, the therapists, the schools, because these are children who have no reference point for what safe is supposed to feel like, and they will accept whatever they're given as normal. Her therapist is a perfect example. Jalissa didn't know how to say, "I don't want to talk about this." She'd never had the words, so she made one up. She'd say cookie or cupcake. That was her signal. Next question, please. I'm not ready. They banned the word. She was told she wasn't allowed to say it in therapy or in the office or around her siblings. She was told that if she stayed quiet, she would never heal. That crying was the only path forward, that she had to answer every question. That's not therapy. That's an interrogation with a nicer chair. And she'll tell you healing has to move at the child's pace, when the child feels safe, not on a schedule that suits the adults in the room. She was blunt about one more thing: keeping siblings together. If she had gone into foster care alone, she says she would never have reported anything, ever. Because when the only people you have ever trusted are your brothers and sisters, separating you from them doesn't just hurt, it removes the only reason you'd ever speak up. Then there's the mother in Ohio, fighting through the courts to see her children. Jalissa's response to that was immediate. She called it really dumb, and she said something I think about constantly, that she believes her own mother was a victim, and that it doesn't earn her a single inch of slack. Being a victim doesn't excuse what you do to your children. She laid out why a parent might really want that visit. Control, intimidation, a reminder that you can't escape me, or optics, to look like a loving parent in front of a court. She would know. She used to go to hearings and see nothing but the back of her mother's head, and she'd throw up from the anxiety of it. Just the back of her head. That's what it cost her. And then, the part that should stay with all of us. We were on the verge of dying. That's how she describes it. And she gets angry at people who notice something and say nothing, who weigh their own discomfort against a child's life and choose the discomfort. There are people in Ohio who've come forward now and said they suspected. They said the kids smelled strange, that they'd see them out and something felt off. They didn't call. 2 clerks at a Dollar General did. That's the whole distance between those children being found and those children never being found at all. Not a task force, not a system. 2 people at work who saw something wrong and picked up a phone. If you think stories like this deserve to be told properly instead of turned into rage bait, subscribing is the only thing that keeps them getting made. To be clear about where things stand, Gary Siders Jr., Elizabeth Siders, Gary Siders Sr., and Christina Siders have all been charged. Every one of them is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in court, and the new indictments are allegations that must still be tested at trial. Everything Kim Deonia offered here is her professional interpretation as a former prosecutor, not a finding by any court, and no investigator has confirmed her theories about the DNA. Most of this case remains sealed. That's normal. The victims are minors, the investigation is active, and there is a great deal that authorities are legally obligated to protect. The Attorney General ended his statement early for exactly that reason, so it may be a while before we learn more. But 3 investigations are running in parallel, 4 people are charged, and the prosecutor who handled the original House of Horrors believes we are only scratching the surface of what was happening in that house. Whatever comes next, I'll be here for it.
Out into the real world, how do you, when you haven't really had any socialization skills, and I'm thinking of the Ohio kids, like how do you even begin to learn?
I honestly don't really know. It's kind of like, it's a little bit blurry, like my memory from things then, but I don't know, it was kind of hard to like adjust to the world, I feel like, or like socialize and stuff, but
Did you know that you could have a friend?
Like while I was in the house?
Yeah.
No. No. I don't know. I thought that people like having friends and like neighbors talking to each other and all that stuff, I thought that was like fake or just like stuff that's in the movies or something. I didn't know that like I could actually have a friend. I also didn't know that like school was even normal. I didn't know like where I would get a friend.
So you have to start really from nothing in terms of learning about all of that.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that people, it's easy to forget about that for most people because we've been born into, or most people have been born into a world where they know everything. Like having friends, like nobody thinks, oh, this person's not gonna know that friends are a thing. And like even with literally saying, how are you? that was odd to me that people would say, "Hi, how are you?" It's like, why is everybody asking how I am? Like, it was so weird because it's the most common phrase ever, but it was never used. I don't remember a single time in that house I was ever asked like by like an adult or a parent, like, "Are you okay?" or "How are you?" Like, it was just odd to me, and I thought it was just because it was my case that people were like, I guess, concerned. But and I heard people talking to saying it to each other, so it was a little bit confusing. But yeah, I feel like it's easy for people to forget like common things like that. Like, it literally is like so hard to adjust. And like for these kids in Ohio, them coming out into this world when they've been isolated their whole life it's gonna be hard. Like, as much as I wish I could be like, it won't be that hard, it'll be easy, that's not the case. It's gonna be really hard to adjust, but it's definitely possible. And it's definitely possible for them to get the healing and everything that they need. And I think that's why it's so important that we make sure their surroundings, the people around them, the workers, and like the schooling that you place them in, like, don't put it in a school that's like known for being bad or something. You know, like the foster care system, like the workers you place them with, the house foster homes that you place them with, it is so important because right now, this is basically their first, like, I don't know because I'm not them, but for me, it literally felt like my first day on earth. And so whatever I accept, whatever I got, that was normal to me. Like for me, when I got out, it was a little bit intimidating, but I was so happy. Like, I was always on cloud 9 because it was like, honestly, just being able to see a tree, just being able to breathe in fresh air, that literally felt like heaven to me. And yeah, like, no, I felt like it can't really get more scary or worse than being in that house. But it still is intimidating being in the world and trying to adjust